Let's get started here. The fifth worst move of the 2024 NBA offseason. This is one that like I put on here at number 5, not because it's like, I mean, it's pretty harmful and like could theoretically shift a title race, honestly, by not getting the right guy in here. But also it just had no chance of ever being successful. It's the Denver Nuggets using their mini mid-level on Dario Saric. Dario Saric, by the end of last season, I know that he had like a decent season in Golden State to start the year, but by the end of last year, he could not play. They couldn't play him. I do not understand why in the world Denver thought that this was going to be a thing.
Well, here's the other thing is they had invested in this role already with young guys. And I think this deal looks even worse if Deron Holmes never gets hurt because this was signed before Deron Holmes tore his Achilles at Summer League, if I'm not mistaken, because I remember being a little bit perplexed when the deal was announced and it was before that. And it's like, oh, he tore his Achilles. Okay, well, now that deal doesn't seem as bad. But the reason where I think this is bad process overall is you just gave Zeke Naji that 4 or 5 year deal or whatever the previous offseason. You take a first round pick that you traded up for in Deron Holmes, and then you use the mini mid-level. And it's not just money this year. That's a 2-year deal with a player option that I assume Dario Saric will take because he's not getting $5 million on the open market this offseason. And so like, it's just when you're limited in resources, and I'm sure this was going to be part of your point, Sam, you have to be good on the margins. And this seemed like not doing well on the margins. Like to me, you just have to roll with the young guys. You gave Zeke Naji a contract. You drafted Deron Holmes high. At the time, you didn't know he was going to be out for his rookie season. Like this isn't where those limited resources should have gone.
I mean, imagine if they had signed like Gershon Yabusele. Like, or if they had signed like anybody who can give them real minutes.
Well, like seriously,
if they like the name that I brought up was like, I really wonder if Buddy Hield would have done this contract instead of the Golden State deal that like is a little bit more money, but like was a more uncertain role.
Well, right. So some other names, I don't know the timing of all this. And I do want to say, you never know where players want to play and what they want guaranteed whenever they're looking. So when I say the name Taurean Prince, I understand that maybe going to Milwaukee had other circumstances and factors that could have been in play. But that was a name that showed up just as I look at numbers that fell below what Saric signed for. He signed for below that. Gary Trent Jr. signed below that. As you mentioned, maybe you could convince Buddy Hield with a certain role. And maybe that's what it was, is they weren't willing to guarantee, and I shouldn't even say guarantee. I don't know that those guys got guarantees with the teams they signed with. But I mean, all of these guys are on mins. Tyus Jones is on a min. Like, there were names out there. Like, even Andre Drummond would have been better process, right? Even though he's ended up not being good. At the time, we thought he was going to be good.
No, we didn't. But like,
we didn't think he was going to. I guess not. Like, you already have DeAndre Jordan, so that's probably not a good name.
Yeah, like
you already have that. To me,
like
roster.
We've named like 7 or 8 names already where this could have worked, right? And they chose not to do any of those names. Dario Saric, in the minutes that Saric has played this year, they lose them by 20 per 100 possessions. Like they lose those minutes by 20 points per 100 possessions. That's bonkers. That's crazy town. And by the way, like he does have a player option for next year.
Yeah.
They might get out of it. Like there was a report in a Spanish newspaper like earlier this week that like Real Madrid has interest in him and like they might be able to, you know, like it might be a Vezenkov situation where, you know, Croatian players decides like I want to play and Real Madrid can afford to go and, pay Dario, maybe not 5, but they can pay him more money. But like if you're Dario and Real asks you, will you come here for 3.5? And you actually get to play and you get to be like this one of the star players on Real Madrid over in Europe. I don't know. Like, I think that might be something that's appealing to him. We'll see if he ends up doing it. If he doesn't, like, I'm so interested to see kind of how this goes now, because he can lock into that player option for $5 million if he really wants to next year.
Yeah. I mean, we've outlined it. It seemed like bad process to me right from the start, whenever you've already put resources into it. And then just what did you expect you were going to get anyway? And for a team that was so capped salary wise and really needed to win on the margins, it just looks really rough whenever you had, like you mentioned, all of the names we brought up. And I think you could probably even go through some more where it's like,
so like here's the home run answer, right? Like I have the name, and maybe they weren't willing to do this because they've been down this road before and like they drafted him and everything. But like Malik Beasley is making $6 million this year.
Yeah. Yep.
Like, do you think that Malik Beasley might have enjoyed going to play with Nikola Jokic? Maybe he wouldn't. Maybe he would have wanted to do something else. Maybe he preferred Detroit, right? But you can pay Malik Beasley $5 million, you get to go play with Jokic, or you can pay him $6 million, you get to go play in Detroit. Like going into last year, or going into like this before this season, I feel like I don't know Malik Beasley, but like most players, I think would have said, "Oh, I get to rehabilitate my stock with Jokic. Let's do it that way instead."
Yes, I would agree that most players, for $1 million, you feel like you're going to recoup that, because people at the time signing with the Nuggets, you would say to yourself, what I do is going to be looked at in a way that is substantiated, where if I go play for the 14-win Pistons, nobody's going to care what I do because they're the 14-win Pistons. Now, I realize the season hasn't played out like that, and it's very different. But last offseason, if you were advising Malik Beasley what to do, it would have been long-term, you make more money signing $5 million for a contender than $6 million for the worst team in the league, where you can hit 1 billion threes. Nobody's going to think it's real because they're not playing competitive basketball. Again, the season has played out entirely different, but I agree with you that we're closing in on 10 names that just would have made so much more sense than what ended up happening.
Okay. Number 4, the Chicago Bulls signed Patrick Williams to a 5-year, $90 million contract that, again, at the time, just was nonsensical. Like it was a deal that completely blew my mind. I understood like why they did it, but it's just crazy to me that this is where we're at. Patrick Williams this season is averaging 8.7 points, 4 rebounds, 2 assists, shooting 38, 34, 72. Those are career worst numbers in terms of true shooting percentage by like 6% true shooting percentage. Despite the fact that he's like upped his 3-point rate, by the way, which like you would expect that to go in the inverse way. His usage percentage is actually like at a career high level. It's basically the same as last year, but like it's slightly higher than where it was. I honestly thought he was better like the last 2 years on defense. Like I thought he was actually pretty okay. But this year, like he's just been okay again. Like I thought he was pretty good the last couple of years. And this is the big question I have for you from Dejounte. Who were they bidding against to give Patrick Williams 5 years, $90 million?
Dejounte, you and I were like on the same wavelength. Thank you for putting my question to Sam in the comments, because that's what I was going to say as well. And I feel like this a lot of times whenever we really question contracts, that's what it comes down to. It was like he just, I know he's a former top 5 pick and all of the stuff, but like what had he done? I guess the 3-point percentage, maybe it would excite a team enough. Like, I guess there was still enough tools, but at best he's a 3-and-D wing, right? That the 3-point percentage had been really good there. It still really is for his career, even though this year's a little bit down. And I mean, it sounds crazy to say. I think the mechanics look funny, but I mean, you got to trust the percentages with how much he has shot.
Well, no. Like here's the thing. The reason the mechanics are important to call out is because the mechanics stop him from shooting at volume.
Sure.
Like, yes, he's taking 4 threes this year, which is a career high, but he's also playing, 25 minutes a game. And like his entire role is to space and shoot the 3.
Yeah.
So like the fact that the mechanics are funky is why he doesn't end up making and taking more of these 3s.
Yeah. And the defense isn't that impactful. Like, I have some positive notes whenever I look back through stuff, but it's not overly consistent. He's not consistently in the starting lineup for that team. It's just like, this contract's probably not going to end up on our worst contracts in the NBA, would be my guess, just because the number is still this might not end up on our worst contracts in the NBA. It might, just because of the length. But as I look at him, like, that's going to be the non-tax MLE pretty soon, which I'm not saying he's that level of player. I think by the end of it, it's not catastrophic, right? Like, you would be able to get off of it, attach it in a like, I wonder if he ends up being a guy that's just like, hey, we need $18 million to match in a trade. So he gets moved. And then that team, plays him as their 9th man. And then they need $18 million.
He has his 4 years left. Like, nobody's excited to take on the 4 years.
That is true. That is it. It's going to be whether he can at least be a rotation player, but he's already aging out of the, this is still kind of exciting, what we saw pre-draft all around 2-way wing forward, to like, it's 3-and-D wing where the defense is okay. And outside of the 3-point shot, like, he does do some mid-range pull-up stuff, but none of it's efficient because he's under 30. He's right at 38% overall. So, and he never gets to the free throw line. It's not like he rebounds crazy. I don't know. It's tough.
I mean, like, even removing this last year, they paid him on the basis of the previous 2 years being 10 points, 4 rebounds, 1 assist, equal assist to turnover, shooting 46, 40, 83. But because, you might look at that and think like that's pretty okay, because he ends up not taking a ton of 3s still. He still had a true shooting percentage over those 2 years that was 3% below league average, despite the fact that he takes very easy shots, basically like off the catch or off of like these mid-range, 1 dribble pull-ups that nobody cares about him taking.
Yeah.
So like, I don't know. I see the path on defense for sure. Like, I think he's had a lot of moments defensively where I'm like, this is pretty interesting and this is pretty positive, but I don't see a whole lot of pathway here offensively right now.
Yeah, no, like, the role is just very limited, so he has to be really, really good in it. The last thing I will say is, like, I just don't find him overly impactful when I watch a game. You know what I mean? Like, you just turn on a game and you take notes, and you know Patrick Williams because he was a former top 5 pick, and you want to see, are you missing something? And it just doesn't, like, even eye test wise, it doesn't. I don't walk away, you know what? Like, the numbers are rough, but, or, the reputation is this, but I think he's making ground. I walk away not being overly impressed a lot of times. And then you look at the efficiency numbers, you look at the on off, all of that stuff. And in general, for a guy that got a 5-year deal at almost $20 million a year, it's pretty negative right now in terms of what you would want in terms of the return on that investment.
I think that's right. That's what my main concern is at this point here. This year, there is nothing holding you back from loving your hair again. Hair is so much more than what you see on the surface. It is a reflection of what's happening inside. Let Nutrafol target the key root causes of your thinning hair and help you grow stronger, healthier strands from within. Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologist recommended hair growth supplement brand, trusted by over 1.5 million people. See thicker, stronger, faster growing hair with less shedding in just 3 to 6 months with Nutrafol. Thinning hair is different for everyone, so a one-size-fits-all approach to hair growth, it just doesn't cut it. Nutrafol has multiple formulas for men and women that are tailored to different life stages and lifestyle factors, so you can get what you need when you need it. It's physician formulated, 100% drug-free ingredients, and it supports healthy hair growth from within by targeting key root causes of thinning, from stress to hormones to aging to nutrition, lifestyle, metabolism. It uses a whole body theory to be able to help your thinning hair, and you can start your hair growth now with Nutrafol. For a limited time, Nutrafol is offering our listeners $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping when you go to Nutrafol.com and enter that promo code Game Theory. Find out why over 4,500 healthcare professionals and stylists recommend Nutrafol for healthier hair. Nutrafol.com, spelled Nutrafol.com, promo code Game Theory. That's Nutrafol.com, promo code Game Theory. Number 3 also involves the Chicago Bulls, but they're not the team that signed the player. DeMar DeRozan's sign and trade to the Sacramento Kings. So DeMar himself has not played that poorly this season, and I will put hand up. I thought this deal was going to be totally fine. I thought that you can make a case for it to make sense. I said at the time that I was comfortable with it, but that the variance here is pretty high. I thought there was a chance it was going to go very poorly. I thought there was a chance that it could go really, really well because they needed another guy to go out and be able to create offensive moments, right? So far, DeMar DeRozan is doing his normal thing. He's averaging 22, 4, and 4. If you look at the true shooting percentage, it is currently right at league average. If you look at the 4 years before this, it was 3% above league average. So it's not that far out of line from where it is and where it has been previously. It's not that he's a worse player. It just has not worked out in any way, shape, or form in terms of the fit. It just has not in any way been what Sacramento needed. And it feels like to me that their offense just doesn't have quite as much flow, even when DeMar was there, or I'm sorry, even when De'Aaron was there. And now it's, they have Bulls redux right now with Levine and DeRozan, and you're just adding Sabonis as an upgrade over Vucevic previously. So, I love DeMar. I am probably one of the big, people in the public sphere, the media that really hammers home how great of a career I think DeMar has had. Being able to score like he has over the course of the number of years that he is unequivocally, without debate, without even a question, a Hall of Fame basketball player. This guy, by the end of the season, I believe, is going to be in the top. He won't be by the end of the year. It'll actually be pretty close. By the end of the year, he might be in the top 25 all time in NBA scoring.
He's awesome.
A fun player, an incredibly fun player, and it just has not in any way, shape, or form worked out for the Sacramento Kings.
Yeah, this is one where I don't even like talking negatively about it because I just really enjoy DeMar DeRozan as a player, and I don't even think it's an indictment, as you outlined, of him as a player. Even though at age 35, you can expect a little bit of decline, which if you just look at the raw numbers, you see a little bit just in terms of points per game, is down a couple, assists per game is down 1, all of that stuff. I remember I did a off-season video not breakdown, but just study of DeMar DeRozan before I'd really got into things. And I came away so impressed with his passing. I didn't respect and understand how good of a passer he was in those years with I think it was San Antonio. I think it was coming off
San Antonio particularly. He was awesome.
Yeah. I think it was the last San Antonio year was what I went and really watched film, like really took a deep dive in that offseason. I was like, man, this guy really creates and passes. And it's a guy that everybody in the world can tell you what DeMar DeRozan is going to try to do, right? Where he's going to try to get to on the floor. And then what is he going to do when he gets there, Sam? He's going to shot fake. And he's going to shot fake. And he might hit you with a reverse pivot and pivot back or whatever. Everybody knows it, and he still gets it done. And I think that's what's so cool about what he does. But at the end of the day, you gave this contract to a 35-year-old wing, and you ended up trading arguably your best player a few months later. That makes it a negative. Like, you ended up trading your best player. Yeah. And in this, you didn't just sign him with cap space. You sent out a couple second-round picks, okay, and a 2031 first-round pick swap as well. It would be one thing if you only signed him with your cap space. It's another when you had to send out assets to acquire him along with the contract you gave him.
And on top of that, like, look, I don't want to blame DeMar for this, right? Like, I don't think that that's totally fair. But in the minutes where DeMar played with De'Aaron Fox, they actually like genuinely lost those minutes this season. They went at a 116.4 offensive rating and a 117.3 defensive rating. And that wasn't exactly in a small sample. It was in a fairly sizable sample of 1,000 minutes, 1,115 minutes. Like, you kind of saw what we had here in, like, with Sacramento, right? And it just didn't work. And part of it was defensive. Like, they had no chance to stop anybody with DeMar and Sabonis and everybody on the court. It was just not a move that made a ton of sense. I'm interested to see where we go here.
That was my next question is like, okay, DeMar's, like, the contract isn't crazy, right? Like, it's just under 25 next year. The third year actually isn't even fully guaranteed. I think it's 10 million guaranteed. It's just over or just under 26. Is there a market? We talk all the time with contracts and the length, right? Like, the Patrick Williams contract is bad because of the years, along with, I mean, it's still an overpay, but because of the years. DeMar on 2 years in the mid-20s, he's still getting buckets. Is there a team out? I feel like there's a team out there where that makes a whole lot more sense, right? Like, he makes more sense and they can take on that money. Is Sacramento,
well, on top of it, he only has 10 million guaranteed in 2026, 27. So it's not like a crazy, guarantee or anything like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's very possible. Like, it's very, very possible they could be able to move it. Yeah, very possible.
It'd be interesting.
It'll be interesting.
They're an interesting team this offseason with him.
I mean,
like, none of that stuff has worked since the deadline. Like, I thought it was going to be better. I thought that stuff was going to be better in general and than in what it has been. So,
yeah. And on top of it, like, look, the Kings are actually going to end up being like slightly better this year. Like, they're going to make the play-in this year in all likelihood. I don't know about better, but like, they're going to be, in a, like, they finished 9th last year. They're going to finish 9th this year. They're going to have way fewer wins, obviously, but like, I feel way worse about where they're at.
Sure.
As an organization right now, having had to trade to De'Aaron, and now they have to split up DeRozan and Levine this summer. Like, you can't do that again.
Yeah.
We can't sit here and do that whole thing again. That just doesn't feel right to me.
Sure.
Okay. Number 2 on the worst moves of the offseason. I like kind of combined these two things here, actually. Really, the thing I want to talk about is the Paul George signing with the Philadelphia 76ers, but also like the decision to extend Joel Embiid is something that we have to talk about. And long term might end up like cratering this era of the 76ers if he just like can't stay healthy, right? But the Paul George signing, right? This is something that I think we all thought would go really well. I think, a number of people, probably including myself, I don't really remember where I was on this. I think I said that I liked the deal because in general, I'm a big Paul George like believer. I think that we all thought the Sixers were the big winner of the offseason.
Yep.
And now we're looking at it after Paul George averaged 23, 5, and 4 and was awesome on defense for the Clippers in 2024. And this year he played 41 games and averaged 16, 5, and 4 with what I believe is a low in field goal percentage going back to 2018. A low in 3-point percentage over the last 4 years, and actually the third worst mark of his career. And even just like from the foul line, it's a low since 2015. It just has not in any way, shape, or form gone well. He hasn't been as impactful defensively as what we would have hoped. And he's not getting younger. He turns 35 in about a month.
Yeah. Listen, I thought it was a really good move. I'm sure, like, I don't know if we did official winners and whatever of the offseason and all of that, but like I didn't think he was going to leave. I remember listening to that, Kawhi signed his extension and then you just assumed that he wouldn't sign it. If Paul wasn't going to sign it, the Clippers would pony it up, all of that. And so I never thought it was actually going to come to fruition. So when it did, I was like, Philly played this perfectly. We said, a few months before that or a handful of months before that, like, what are they going to do with James Harden? Like, how's this all going to work? Like, what are they going to do? And they figured it out pretty quick. It looked like, right? They brought in their third star. In theory, the idea of Tyrese Maxey, Paul George, Joel Embiid is about the perfect mesh of 3 stars you can put together in terms of if they're healthy and what they're good at and complementing each other. It doesn't seem like there's a ton of overlap between those 3, but it was always the injury concerns and people always brought it up, and it played out in catastrophic form this season, starting with Embiid and then continuing with Paul George. But to your point, I think what's scarier is in the 41 games he has played, playing 33 minutes, it's been really just not good, Sam. He has not looked anywhere close to that two-way wing we all loved that Paul George was throughout the rest of his career.
Yeah, so at some point in the next few weeks, we'll be doing worst contracts in the NBA. I mean, Paul George is definitely in the top 3. I don't know if it's number 1 or number 2 or number 3, but it's very, very high. And the Joel extension is also up there. That is a real.
That's a scary contract right now with in situation.
Yeah. And you don't want to crush anything based off of injuries. I feel bad for the way that this is all worked out. And honestly, this probably could be number 1, combining the 2 things, right? I think there's a real case for this to be number 1. But my issue is that you probably didn't need to do this more than anything. You had him for another year, completely locked in, if I remember correctly. It's not like he was coming up on a player option. You could have done this summer. You could have waited to see how he came back from his injury that he suffered last year and didn't look right in the playoffs. You could have taken the time to figure out, what does this look like? And oh, by the way, he still had a player option at $60 million in 2026-27 that now is torn up, and you've given him, 59, 64, 69 over the course of his 32, 33, and 34-year-old seasons, when I think all of us probably think that those years are not going to be good.
Yeah, so he was locked in for this year and next year. And then, as you mentioned, he had the player option for 26-27. Instead, they ripped that up. They give him 3 for $193, essentially, with a player option on the end of that. So in 20,
you know what, Bryce, as we're talking about this is number one. This is not number two.
69 million in 28-29 player option in his age 34 season for a guy that you've had in your organization his entire NBA career. And I would assume, I don't know how this always works, but they should have as much medical information about Joel Embiid as anybody, right? Like they should know. They've been a part of it from day one. I want to quickly pivot back to Paul George and the contract, Bradley Beal this year. For all of the hate that Bradley Beal gets, Bradley Beal played 48 games this year and scored 17 points a game on 51, 40, 81. So when you're talking about these contracts and production and stuff, Bradley Beal was putting up those numbers still. We're making a pivot. We had a turnover, but we came back and we adjusted. We changed it on the fly. I love it.
We're changing it on the fly. This is definitely the worst set of moves of the offseason, for sure. They now have Paul George and Joel Embiid locked in over the next 4 years for over $100 million. They have no space. They have no flexibility. They have no ability to really change anything with their team. And by the way, Paul George is a player option in that final year, which I'm guessing he will probably be exercising. Next year, Paul George and Joel Embiid make, I believe that the number is about $107 million against the salary cap that I'm trying to remember here what exactly the number is. I think it's 150-ish, somewhere in that ballpark. Salary cap next year is 154 in all likelihood. So the Paul George thing is a move that just hasn't worked out, right? It's a move that we thought made sense. It's a move that probably could have made sense and could have worked. The Joel one to me is an own goal that was avoidable if you had just been patient and waited and seen where this would have gone this year.
Sure.
And that's what the bummer is. That ultimately, that is why the more I think about this is the clear number one. This is this is now a guy that's taking up over the course of their next, let's see here, 5 years realistically? He's taking up 35 to 33% of their salary cap in all of those years, basically. And that's just not they had the best minimum signing of the offseason in Gershon. They got a steal at number 16 with Jared McCain, or 17, whatever the pick was. And they got an undrafted rookie in Justin Edwards that looks pretty good, that we just talked about on the podcast last week.
Yeah.
I don't know, man.
It's
and you still ended up having the worst offseason probably because these deals are so bad.
It's funny because we just talked about the Nuggets not winning on the margins with their moves, and Philly crushed the margins this offseason with Gershon, even bringing back Kelly Oubre, they did really good on the margins, and the big money is just really bad money right now. And as we mentioned, if these two guys come back and if somehow Paul George is healthy and kind of can get going and Joel figures out exactly what's wrong with his knee, and even if he gave him, 2 good years, 3 good years, all of a sudden we can be having a completely different conversation. But based on the history of things right now and the money tied up, as you mentioned, it's 65% of the cap between those two guys for the next 1, 2, 3 years for sure. That's a lot of cap for guys that it's not looking good in their 30s and the injury history and where things are trending right now.
Yeah, it's real bad. Okay. The deal that I had at 1 going in, and I'll explain why I had it at 1, but it's clearly 2 now that I think about it. And now that we've gone through this, is the Dejounte Murray to the New Orleans Pelicans deal. And the reason I had this at 1 originally is because not only is Dejounte taking up like a ton of your cap at this point, but you actually traded him for a better player in Dyson Daniels, who, like, I'm sorry, Dyson Daniels is a better player than Dejounte Murray, just is. The things that he brings defensively, the fact that like he can play off of trade at a really high level. There's a reason that the Hawks, frankly, are a better basketball team this year. This year, even though like they've only had Jalen Johnson for like half the season, right? It was removing Dejounte Murray and bringing in Dyson Daniels, who has been one of the 5-7 best defenders in the league this year, plus playing a role on offense. And oh, by the way, they gave up 2 first-round picks with it.
Yeah.
And by the way, also Dejounte, now I get that like Dejounte was playing hurt before the Achilles injury too. So like these numbers are what they are. But like he was averaging 17, 6 and 7, but was shooting 39, 29, 82. True shooting percentage was 14% below league average on a player that you are paying $29 million a year this year, up to 33 in 2026-27. You're paying him 20% of the cap the entire way. So this is not as bad as the Joel and Paul George, double dip. I thought it was originally because you gave up assets in addition to having to pay him. It's not that bad. But it's really bad, and it has really, in my opinion, set the Pelicans back, and they have to make significant changes here this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, DeJounte's deal, like, it's just not as big, right? And so that's part of it. DeJounte's also younger than both of those guys, and so maybe you can expect him to bounce back. Also, with like he's never had the ceiling of either of those guys as well. At the very least, Dyson Daniels is definitely the better player for Atlanta. Like, to your point, I mean, I can hear people arguing Dyson hasn't grown so much on the offensive end. I try to bring that every time we talk about Dyson Daniels. I try to talk about how impressed I am with him offensively, even if there are some limitations, but he is perfect playing next to Trae Young and those other wings. We highlighted that last episode when we talked about Ricochet, but it's not just the defense. It's the cutting offensively. It's the ability to hit floaters. He can pass. He can take some ball handling duties when absolutely necessary. So this is one that has always stuck with me. I haven't always been a huge DeJounte Murray fan.
Neither have I. Yeah.
Like, I just think it's a tough archetype at times, but yeah, in terms of like this being a bad move overall, this one is tough for the Pelicans to absorb.
Yeah. And, look, the thing that we talked about in the offseason was we didn't like this deal because we didn't like the fit with Brandon Ingram. And we mentioned, the thing that I keep bringing up is that I like having Zion Williamson is, Bryce is in the circle of hell right now. I like having Zion Williamson play more on the ball and play like point. And DeJounte is a guy that can't really do that. He's just not a guy that's ever really been able to play a substantial amount of time off the ball, which we just learned in Atlanta. Like, that's a thing that we know now, that he can't really play in any sort of like off ball manner. You need to put the ball in his hands for him to have any sort of effectiveness, while we try to bring Bryce back onto the stream here. Yeah, I'm just like very curious to see where the Pelicans go now, because they're down 2 of their interesting first round picks. They now have to deal with the DeJounte Achilles injury, which, by the way, like I've tried to avoid bringing up in this conversation. DeJounte Murray is also out with an Achilles injury. and probably won't be himself next year either, which means you need to find a way to make this team competitive again, or you just need to rebuild, which probably involves trading CJ, which probably involves figuring out what your plan is with Zion. I don't know what that is. They're going to get a top 6 pick at the very least. Could be number 1, could be number 4, right? The good news is like Trey Murphy exploded this year, and you still have Herb Jones, who's one of the best defensive wings in the entire NBA. But they're in a tough spot. They're in a really, really difficult position now to be able to build this thing. I would expect that they make pretty substantial changes though this offseason. I wouldn't expect that this team looks all that similar. I would guess that at the very least Trey and Herb are there, but I would think that anything else could be on the table. And a big reason for that is that this deal just for Dejounte did not go well in any way, shape, or form. And that's what makes it really, really hard to determine where their next step is, in my opinion. Bryce is back. I just, kind of talked about the Pelicans' next steps moving forward, which I genuinely like. I think everything outside of Trey and Herb is on the table at this point.
Yeah, it's a really interesting team to follow in terms of what decisions they make. We've talked about what do you do with Zion and how the type of player he is makes that a really hard thing to figure out. I think I'm with you. Trey has been incredible this year. We've talked about that. Herb, obviously, with what he does defensively. You have some interesting young players, and Misi. I've always been a Jordan Hawkins guy, but yeah, I don't know what they do with CJ in the last year of his contract. Dejounte, I don't, coming off the injury, obviously you're just gonna have to keep him and play him for now, but it didn't set them back in, like you said, probably the way, as we talked through it, the way it set back the Sixers. But it just, as you look at it now, you giving up 2 first-round picks to a team that then got better because Dyson Daniels is so good and he's on his rookie deal. It does not look good for, like, that's not good process right there.